Hello, my name is Abigail Hatto and I am the head of the school at Barcelona Montessori School. I'd like to take some time to talk to you today about conflict resolution and bullying, and how we deal with these issues at school and how we hope that parents can support us at home. So today I'm going to talk a bit about bullying in the media and what is and isn't bullying, some common misconceptions about bullying and how responsibility is affected by bullying. We're also going to talk about what to do or not to do with mean behaviour and about bringing the issue to school, as well as bystanders and their role, and mobile phones and watches and school policies. So when we talk about bullying, I went online and I had a quick Google of bullying, and one of the things that first comes to mind is the immense suffering that bullying causes. The word bullying is something that affects us on an emotional level. When we think about bullying, we often think about people who have suffered a lot, maybe committed suicide later, or had extreme aggression and pain, and had to go through that, often alone. We often see images of people who have been bullied and how schools have failed or people have failed them. Occasionally, we also see how bullied kids can turn into successful people, perhaps with some mental health issues later down the line. And often we are shown the message that we can stop bullying and that we have to stop bullying. And how bullying, what we consider bullying as, and that if we see it, we say it, and we stop it, everything will be okay. So I think it's important to, when we're considering the topic of bullying, first of all take a moment to be aware of your mochila, what you carry in your past. Maybe you were a victim of bullying. Maybe you know somebody else who was. And also gossip that goes around. You have to be careful of the names that we use to describe things. So what is bullying? According to the National Centre Against Bullying, bullying is something ongoing and involves a deliberate misuse of power in relationships. And it's through repeated verbal, physical and or social behaviour that intends to cause physical, social and or psychological harm. It can involve an individual or a group misusing their power or perceived power over one or more people who feel unable to stop it from happening. And this is very important. I've highlighted these bits in bold because it's a feeling of being unable to stop it from happening. Bullying can happen in person or online, but the important point is that it needs to be repeated. What it is not, and this is where bullying is often used in the wrong context, bullying is not a single incident. It's not a single conflict, it's not a single fight, and it's especially not something that happens between people who are equal. There needs to be an imbalance of power there. So social rejection or dislike when it's occasional episodes is not bullying. A single episode of nastiness or being horrible, however mean it is not bullying. And a child who randomly acts aggressively or intimidates random people is not bullying somebody. They are being aggressive to many people. And mutual arguments or disagreements or fights, again, are not bullying. They are things that happen within groups of friends, but they're not necessarily bullying. The important bit is that it intends to cause physical and social or psychological harm. Therefore, bearing this in mind and thinking about the age of children, we need to think that young children, especially those under 6, try out a lot of mean behaviour. They are constantly testing the power that their words have. and the power that their behaviour has on other people. But they are not necessarily yet aware of trying to cause physical, social or psychological harm, especially long term. They're noticing patterns and they're making inferences. For example, they might bite somebody who then that person will cry. And young children also, even 6 or 7 year olds, they notice that if they tell somebody that they're stupid, they'll cry. But if they say the same to another friend, perhaps they'll hit them. And they do this at home as well with parents. If I ask my dad for something, I might get what I want. But if I do it to my mum, perhaps she takes longer to crack. Or if I hit my brother while my mum's on the phone, she'll hang up and she'll come and talk to me. All of these things aren't necessarily bullying. And so mean behaviour in infant community and children's house, and even at the very beginning of primary, is often addressed differently to how we would address bullying. It's also important because this is the message that we often receive, that children are told that we need to stop bullying, or to call different things bullying. And I think it's very important that we send the right message to children, that mean behaviour is not okay, but mean behaviour doesn't make them a bully. And I will talk a bit more about that in more detail in a minute. So, having talked a moment about bullying, I also want to dispel another myth, and that is, just because you've signed your children up to a Montessori school, they are not magically nicer than any other children. We don't have a spell that we put on children. It was the minute they walk into a Montessori school that makes them nice. And it takes hard work to learn to get on with other people. And that's something that we do at school every day, and I'm sure you do at home as well. And part of that hard work is dealing with these moments of conflict. So to go back to the importance of a name. When we are looking at two children, perhaps a boy pulling a girl's hair, or a child who, has a shaved head, not wearing a t-shirt, and who's broken a table, we don't necessarily refer to this as gender violence or being a thug. And in that same way, being mean is not the same as bullying. Bullying is repeated, it's intended to cause harm, and most importantly, our victim feels powerless. And this is where really we also want to work with children who are not only the ones who are being mean, but also the ones who are on the receiving end, so that they don't feel powerless. And we know that often children behave in a mean way when they feel bad. And this is a nice quote from Jane Nelson, who is the person who came up with positive discipline, or one of the people. And she said, "Where did parents get the crazy idea that in order to make children behave, we should humiliate them, we should make them feel shame, humiliation, or even pain? Children are more motivated to cooperate, learn new skills, and offer affection and respect when they feel encouraged, connected, and loved." So if there's a reason not to label a child as a bully, perhaps that is one. And I'm not saying that we never use the word bully or bullying, but I think we need to be very careful at which point we use that word and to whom. So one of the messages that we try to send, particularly in our primary classrooms, to all of the children, and they might even repeat this back to you at times, that we think carefully about our actions before we make them, and we take responsibility for our actions after we take them. And we talk honestly and openly about problems with a view to finding a solution. So now I'd like to talk a bit about some of the groundwork that means. In the early years, as well as in primary, no means no. We as teachers have to say no. I know that often different parenting forums suggest different ways of avoiding saying no, but no is a very powerful and important word that children need to learn to understand, to listen to, and to use. We can explain once why we've said no, and then we can check for understanding. But it's very important not to over-explain. Most of our children are fairly intelligent and capable of understanding. And to explain time and time again the same thing to a child sends the message that we think that they're not capable of remembering or understanding. Whereas maybe they're pushing a limit for a different reason. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they were so angry that it didn't matter that they understood. But they probably know the limit anyway. And also, we have to respect when children say no to us. With this in mind, it's very important not to turn into, the radio, who's constantly explaining why we do and we don't do different things. Because we often zone out from listening to the radio, and we know this when we're in the car driving. At home, it's also important, as we do in school, to be aware of play fighting. Children naturally like to fight with each other. Play fighting is something that happens in many mammals, including humans. And as long as it is something that's done with consent, it's a good way to develop muscle, to try out different moves, and to bond with other people. The important thing is that it needs to be done with consent and that everybody needs to be enjoying the fight, and it needs to be a play fight, because the minute it turns from a play fight into a real fight, that's when it should have already stopped. So we always check that the children are play fighting rather than real fighting. Other groundwork that you can do at home is to talk about your day. We have conflicts throughout our days, some days more than others, but there are always moments of disagreement or conflict when we are interacting with members of society. So if we're talking about our day, the good, the bad, and any solutions we came up with, it's important that children see these. We all live in a world where we know that Instagram and Facebook often like to show us the perfect world that other people live in. But perhaps that's not the reality that our children are growing up with. And so it's important that they see that these things aren't necessarily true, that everybody has problems. Another thing to do is to not be afraid of emotions. That doesn't mean we have to allow our children to be constantly driven by their emotions, but they shouldn't be afraid to label them and show them. We also need to model good conflict resolution between family members, and this can be easier said than done, but using the I feel when you is a good way to start. And also to think about how would you like your child to react in the future. Over the years, we've often been asked by parents, but if my child is being hit every day by another child, at some point they should hit them back. The difficulty is that as children get older, they need to have other skills. Because when your child is 18, if they are in a situation in the street where somebody is acting aggressively towards them, chances are you probably don't want your adult child to hit another person back. You'd probably rather they found a different way out of the situation, because chances are if they hit somebody back, they might then be hit again. They might end up in trouble with the police. So we want to try to think that what we're teaching our children now are skills that will last them well into the future. Another area of groundwork is to model respect for individuality. And this can be difficult because sometimes it goes against our own wants and desires for our family. So maybe we have our child who wants to dress in a way that we don't necessarily like or agree with. They have interests that we can't quite understand. Perhaps we really enjoy sporting events and they're more into art. Perhaps they have friends who have family structures that go against ones that we hold as valuable, or they have a culture that we don't know about or don't understand. And it's important that they see that although we don't necessarily agree with everything, we can respect it. And finally, it's always good to model a positive outlook. Sometimes it's easy to get into the habit of complaining about things and voicing these complaints. But this is not necessarily helpful for children. because in the end they often take a lot from how we behave, and don't understand that our complaints might be driven by many things that they don't see. So what do we do when a conflict does occur? I think it's important, especially if you have more than one child, to always keep these things in mind. When a conflict occurs, we need to decide when to get involved. As a guide, I would say, in the case of violence, always. In the case of tears, mostly. But there might be times when it's okay to wait and see. Perhaps your children are just screaming at each other, and maybe you're not going to get involved. And there are different positive discipline techniques that can give you some ideas of what to do in those situations. Because you need to be aware of rescuing or of giving too much attention. And you should always give attention to the right person. It's tempting to go straight away and tell off the person who is upset, tell off the person who is being upset, who is upsetting the other person. But actually maybe what we want to do is go to the person who is upset rather than tell off the person who has done wrong. We also want to allow emotions to be displayed. We have a saying, all emotions are acceptable, or all feelings are acceptable, but not all behaviours are. And there's an important part about connection before correction. We can empathise and name feelings first before we try to talk about what you should have done. As adults, when we have a conflict, we can model calming down. There are always times when something happens. Maybe a shop assistant is rude to us and we need to show that we're going to calm down. Maybe a mother, a parent, a mother-in-law, a father-in-law has annoyed us. And we can say, I felt really angry when. We can also model apologising. Perhaps we've said something to upset our child, and we want to model how we apologise for that. And then model saying that we should have, or in future we will try. I think it's important to bear in mind that listening is required, but an apology can't necessarily be pushed or forced, because then it's a false apology. As adults, it's also very important that when we've made a mistake, we avoid excuses, stereotypes, and labels. And we can expect more from our children if we do that. We can show them that we are all capable of making mistakes, regardless of the reasons behind it, but we can all accept our mistakes and own up to them. At school, in the Children's House and in the early primary years, we talk about the peace table. And the peace table is a place where often conflicts are resolved or discussed. The rule of the peace table is that you cannot refuse an invitation to the peace table. If somebody is upset or angry and they invite you to the peace table, you need to go. You have to listen. You can share your feelings if you want to, but the purpose is really for repair and to prevent future problems. And on the peace table, there are different cards. Sometimes there are books. You don't have to say anything, but the important point is that you're there to listen. As children get older, they might not need a physical peace table. They might find places on their own where they can discuss problems, and they often look for adult guidance to support them in this if they need it. But the idea is that we're teaching children slowly but surely to solve problems on their own. When it comes to your child reporting conflicts with friends, there's many things that we have to bear in mind here. The first is to make time for it. Often that time comes at the very end of the day, just as you're hoping to turn the light off and say goodnight. They explain to you what sounds like an enormous problem. If this is something that your child does regularly, perhaps it's a way of them telling you that they need you to make time for this during the day. This can sometimes be when you're driving in the car or you're having a snack. but have some alone time with your child, particularly as they get older, where they can tell you about problems they've had over dinner and look for solutions. It's important to be able to listen without interrupting or judging, and sometimes that can take patience because the story can be very long and somewhat confusing. It's also important to be aware that you are hearing one side, and I always say to parents, be aware of the convenient truth. When children tell us about an issue, they won't necessarily lie, but they might tell us only one side, or the bit that affected them emotionally first and foremost. For children to be able to tell you give you a clear image of what actually happened that they did that upset the other person, often comes from them having processed it with another person, either the person they hurt or with an adult first. So you may not hear the full side of the story. You may only hear one side of the story, sorry. Here it's important that when you're listening, you're naming and empathizing with feelings. It sounds like you were very angry. I would have probably been very upset at that point. All of these phrases help them to understand what they were feeling at the time. And then perhaps you can look for solutions together. If the problem hasn't yet been discussed with an adult, perhaps you can talk about what things might they do in the future. Could they walk away? Could they find an adult? And then it might come to a point where together, or with the child's agreement, you inform a teacher. And I would say this is particularly in the case of repeated conflicts. If your child is complaining about something happening over and over again, you might say to them, okay, tomorrow I think you need to talk to your teacher about this, and I'd like you to tell me what they say. And if they aren't able to do this, then you as the adult need to explain that you are going to talk to the teacher. Ideally though, we want to do this with them and with their consent. When your child is reporting a conflict to you, or any problem really, be aware of your reaction, because especially primary children, they love a story. And if you're going to add drama to that story, they're really going to start to enjoy it. Now, I'm not by any means saying that all stories and on all occasions this is true, but some children, and you know your children better than anybody else, do like a bit of drama. So be careful of your reaction and how you feed into that story. If you notice that your child is telling you about problems with one or two friends over and over again, perhaps one of the easiest things that you can do is help them to make new friends. You all have a class WhatsApp group. There are, on Transparent Classroom and My Montessori Journal, you have the names of different friends, and you can help your child by making a play date outside of school with one other child. I say one because sometimes two is company and three is a crowd, and three can also cause other problems. But sometimes having that special time with one other person helps them to connect at school. As I said before, remember you are the adult in this situation. If play dates or holidays with other friends aren't working, it's your job to stop them. We as a school can't do much to stop a conflict if the children are together at weekends or going away on holiday. We can help with problems that happen in school, but ones that happen outside of school start to get more complicated, particularly when they are repeated. Above all, please don't reach out to other parents. Whilst I know that we as humans want to believe that we are all reasonable, intelligent human beings, talking to another parent about a mistake that their child has made is delicate. And it's often better to inform the school and allow us to deal with that than for you to go directly. You might be disappointed about how that parent reacts, and that can therefore have an effect on your child or the situation that makes it worse rather than better. We often want our children to apologise, and we often want other children to apologise to our children. I'm sorry is something that is useful when it's genuine. But when it's not genuine, it can actually make the situation worse. So don't force it, encourage it, suggest it, ask somebody, what would you like to hear? Was there something you would like to hear from the other person? But give them time. And if the I'm sorry comes and you feel like it's not genuine, then maybe check with the other person and make sure they accept it. I would say always check, even if it sounds like a genuine apology, that it's been accepted, and ask them, if not, why? Is there something else that needs to happen? Perhaps you have two siblings where one is constantly hitting the other, and that child simply doesn't want to accept sorry anymore because it's been happening so often. A word about stop, and this comes up in another talk, and will do in others. It's not enough to say stop. Once we get above about the age of 3, we should be able to say things like stop hitting me, stop shouting, stop taking my toys. And as we get older, 5, 6, 7-year-olds should be able to say stop hitting me, I don't like it, it hurts me. Stop shouting, it hurts my ears. Stop taking my things, it's annoying. Full sentences and eye contact are vital for showing assertiveness, and that will help children get what they want. Another side point is, and I mentioned it before, all feelings are acceptable, but not all behaviours are. All feelings are necessary, the good and the bad. Dealing with feelings is a learning process, and we have to go over it time and time again. Children will not just grow out of it. There might be a time where our toddlers and our 0 to 6 children are more driven by their feelings. Perhaps in primary they're able to calm down, they are more in a more social stage, so they begin to be able to talk more about their feelings. But certainly in adolescence, these strong feelings and emotions will come back, so they don't just grow out of it. And learning to deal with feelings now prepares them for dealing with them tomorrow, be that when they are 13, when they are 18, when they are 25. So let's look at an example. My child has said someone's being mean to them. What should I do? First off, I think you can thank your child for telling you. Maybe tell them they've done the right thing. You could offer a hug. Perhaps you can ask them if they want to talk about the solutions that they have tried or want to try. You can discuss which adult they could ask for help from, and perhaps make an agreement about when they're going to ask for help, if this is something that's happening time and time again. You could also write down details about the incidents they describe, particularly if they involve some level of violent actions or words, or are very frequent. As I said before, you can reinforce other friendship groups outside school with playdates. And if the problem persists, or if there are serious incidents, make an appointment to speak to your child's teacher, or with me, or with any of our safeguarding officers, with your child. It is very important that you come with them, and at the very least with their agreement, if really they can't. But I think most children will understand the importance of coming with a parent. What should you not do if your child says someone's being mean to them? Don't ignore it entirely, but there might be times when you want to see if ignoring it makes it go away a bit. Sometimes if we realise we overreacted or were very involved when the problem was initially addressed, or if perhaps the children have maybe heard an adult conversation where perhaps we've been talking about a child, they might have got the wrong idea. They might think that this is very interesting for us and that we're very involved in this. And they might want to talk about this a lot because it seems to entertain us. So sometimes we might decide to ignore it slightly. We certainly don't want to open our mochila, our rucksack, Google bullying and read all the headlines. We certainly don't want to label it as bullying to our child or to other people. We do not want to reach out to the other child's parents and discuss the problem. As I said before, often this leads to disappointment. Definitely, We don't want to ask if anyone knows anything about it in a WhatsApp group. This is also known as cyberbullying, and we don't want to be a cyberbully ourselves. We don't want to tell our child what to do. Remember at the beginning we talked about how children need to feel able to get out of a situation? If we as adults are constantly telling them what to do, then we're not helping them to feel capable of dealing with a situation themselves. We don't want to tell the school without our child's knowledge, because again, we're taking away the child's capability of dealing with the situation. We don't want to tell a child that it will be okay. Just like when they fall over, we don't want to tell them no pasa nada, because sí que pasó algo. We can't promise that everything will be okay, because we can't tell the future. We don't want to tell our child to fight back physically, because we certainly don't want them to do that when they're older. That could land them in problems with the law or in hospital. And we don't want to make a promise to a child that we cannot keep. Like, I'm going to stop this from happening, because maybe we can't. So let's assume we're going to bring the problem to school. What should we remember when we're doing this? First of all, this is the start of a process. The problem won't necessarily go away immediately. We will listen, we might ask for details, and we might ask you to sign a document or write down what you've told us. We will speak with all of those people who are involved, and probably more than once, and this might take time, so you might need to be patient. Again, bear in mind that all feelings are acceptable, but not all behaviours are. We will probably ask your child to make an agreement to report mean behaviour to a teacher. And we will make agreements with your child and others to only speak about problems at certain times and with certain people. This avoids gossip. We might ask you to do the same. And it doesn't matter how old the problem is, it's the feelings that count. Please, please, please always check with the school before labelling it as bullying. We as a school have certain policies and certain procedures that we have to follow in the case of suspected bullying. If we begin to label everything as bullying, we're going to spend a lot of time talking to external bodies and possibly creating problems that go outside of the school, outside of our hands. We will pass on a problem that is bullying to the police or to other authorities when necessary. But we have certain internal policies that we have to follow first before we do that. Having said that, when we bear all these things in mind, we need to keep in mind that conflicts are very useful as children grow up, and they're very important that we have to have. Conflicts help us to learn to respect differences. They help us to learn new vocabulary to describe our emotions. They help us to develop problem-solving techniques, because as we argue with our siblings, there's a study that says that children who argue and fight more as siblings are closer as adults. They help us to develop our own values and think about our own actions and become more independent. As we have conflicts with other people and we are able to solve them, we feel more capable. They also help us to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes a small argument with a friend feels like the end of the world until we have a much bigger conflict with other people, and then we see that, day-to-day life is perhaps not so bad. And through conflicts, we also learn what it means to be a kind, nice, caring person and what we can do when someone is not. A note about bystanders. Bystanders are the people who aren't involved in the conflict themselves, but they're on the sidelines, perhaps watching or walking away. And bystanders can do a lot to prevent mean behaviour becoming bullying. So you can help your child to stand up for others by calling out behaviour that they feel is mean. They can help to learn that they have a social or moral responsibility and who they can go to for help, both inside and outside school. You can help by giving real-life examples of what to say, like, that's not respectful, stop, I don't like it. Most importantly, when your child calls you out, accept it Don't justify or try to explain it away. We talk a lot at school about thinking before we speak. And think, we use the letters for, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Because if not, maybe we don't say it. A note on mobile phones and watches. The school has a policy. I don't know if you've read it, you've all signed it, but you might have forgotten it. We have it for a reason. Please be aware of giving your child access to a smartphone or watch or social media because of disappearing messages. Disappearing messages on platforms like Snapchat are often used for bullying behaviour and mean behaviour. Also be aware of the age at which different apps are meant to be used. WhatsApp and Instagram have an age limit of 13, but that doesn't mean that everything on there is appropriate for 13-year-olds. In fact, much of it is not. Be aware of how well content is protected. Also think about what your child could be doing if they weren't fiddling with a phone or a watch. Children can spend a lot of time on a tablet just playing with the calculator app, but perhaps they can get more from their day by playing with some toys. And the importance of a safe space and disconnection when people are mean. One of the biggest things that mobile phones has done for bullying is to bring it from just children being mean at school to having those children in your bedroom being mean to you at all hours. It's very important that children have downtime, particularly when they're going through something difficult. I went to a conference a few years ago where a psychologist was talking about cyberbullying, and she said cyberbullying starts in the WhatsApp groups of parents who are in the early years. So cyberbullying empieza en los grupos de WhatsApp de los padres en infantil. And we as adults have to be very careful about the words that we use and the things that we do in our online lives, online and offline. We need to model the right behavior. We need to, as much as possible, avoid gossip, avoid criticizing people, avoid making fun of people, and acknowledge the kindness of others, and acknowledge when we've made mistakes. We need to stop when we're asked to stop, especially by our own children. Like I said, primary children are dramatic. We need to be aware as adults of the convenient truth and where we share this truth. And we need to be aware of what influences your child. Is it social media? Is it TV, films, relatives? You can't avoid exposure, but you can talk openly about mean behaviour. And we can also be aware of thinking, my child would never do that. The minute we think that, chances are our child will do that. And also be aware of blaming it on somebody else. Just because my cousin, my friend does that, it doesn't mean that I have to make the same choice. And if you want a bit of a fright, you can Google Orange, niños ciber acosadores, lo que no sabes de tus hijos. It's a great video that shows just how little we know about our own children sometimes and what happens when we think that it would never be our child. So a quick word on school policies. We have a number of policies and procedures that are to do with mean behaviour, positive discipline, bullying, looking after children or safeguarding and child protection. We have our relationships and sexual health policy, and we have our technology and screen time policy. I suggest that you look at these when you have time, because the purpose behind them is to create a more tolerant school and a place where others can be respected. So the take-home message of today is help me find help when I need it. Be that in school, be that outside school, be that with parents. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you found it useful.